A storm of fiery artillery, magnificent and terrible in its absolute devastation, rains down upon the shattered trench lines, possessing enough kinetic fury to incinerate the mightiest of war engines into nothingness. The very atmosphere ignites, screaming under the weight of such unforgiving retribution. Yet, as the choking smoke eventually dissipates, revealing the smoldering ashes of the ruined battlefield, a terrifying truth emerges from the suffocating darkness. From the burning craters, colossal warriors clad in heavily blistered and rusted ceramite armor step forward into the dying light. They do not waver in the face of absolute ruin, nor do they seek the cowardice of cover against the remaining laser fire. They simply advance with a stoic, oppressive silence, their heavy boots crushing the pulverized concrete of the shattered defensive fortifications. A noxious, yellowed fog spills outward from their corrupted power packs, rolling across the devastated ground like a suffocating tide. Wherever this toxic miasma touches, the defensive weaponry of the enemy automatically crumbles, rusting and dissolving into useless flakes of dead, oxidized metal. Hear my words, my faithful acolytes, for I am your most humble servant, the archivist, speaking to you from the candlelit depths of the sanctum of oaths. We delve today into a sealed record, a forbidden truth locked away by the holy Ordo Malleus. We speak of the 14th Legion, the relentless death guard, those who became the true lords of eternal decay and pestilence. They are the ultimate purveyors of absolute despair, a grim testament to the terrifying reality that even the greatest resilience can be irrevocably broken. To comprehend their tragic descent into the darkest abyss, we must cast our minds back through the turbulent currents of time. We must look upon the toxic, mountainous world of Barbarus, a realm perpetually shrouded in poisonous smog and ruled by tyrannical, inhuman warlords. It was upon this forsaken sphere that their pale king, the Primarch Mortarion, was cast down from the heavens during his infancy. Raised amidst the suffocating fumes, he learned the bitter taste of survival in an environment designed to brutally extinguish all mortal life. Mortarion, the Lord of Death, wielded a massive, rusted scythe named Silence, a weapon that would eventually reap countless souls across the stars. Clad in tattered robes, his sickly, pale flesh bore the undeniable marks of a being who had endured unquantifiable systemic suffering. He led a desperate rebellion against the foul overlords of Barbarus, forging a battered army of human survivors from the toxic valleys. Through sheer, unrelenting stubbornness, he taught his people to endure the poison, to march upward into the lethal mist without showing fear. When the master of mankind finally descended upon Barbarus to reclaim his lost son, Mortarion had already forged his indomitable philosophy. He believed that true strength was born solely through surviving the most excruciating agony, a doctrine he would impart to his newly commanded legion. The warriors of the 14th Legion were reshaped in their father's grim image, becoming an unstoppable infantry force of unparalleled endurance. They rejected complex tactics and cowardly maneuvering, choosing instead to march steadily through the most devastating barrages the enemy could possibly unleash. Throughout the glorious era of the Great Crusade, the Death Guard served as the Emperor's most inexorable instrument of systematic cleansing. They specialized in bringing planetary compliance to the most hazardous, irradiated, and toxic battle zones, where other, lesser legions would simply wither and perish. They fought in the deepest, most crushing gravities, and waded through swamps of boiling, acidic chemicals, without ever breaking their perfectly disciplined ranks. Their heavily customized, unpainted armor was a stark reflection of their utilitarian mindset, completely devoid of any unnecessary ornamentation or vainglorious heraldry. Their bolters fired specialized ordnance, designed to eradicate the most resilient of alien horrors with absolute, merciless efficiency. The Death Guard did not simply conquer worlds. They methodically purged them of all defiance, grinding the enemy into the absolute dust beneath their heavy, unrelenting treads. Mortarion's sons possessed a physical endurance that blatantly defied all natural laws, a genetic resilience that allowed them to casually ignore catastrophic damage. They could absorb tremendous amounts of punishment, silently pressing forward while lesser warriors would have collapsed completely under the overwhelming trauma. Yet, beneath their stoic exterior, a deep-seated bitterness began to take root within the collective heart of the 14th Legion. They felt unappreciated by their more flamboyant brother legions, believing that their grim, grinding sacrifices were deliberately overlooked by the distant lords of Terra. Mortarion himself harbored a deep resentment towards the Emperor, a lingering anger born from the perceived theft of his absolute victory on Barbarus. He hated the hypocrisy of tyrants, yet slowly, unknowingly, he was walking the very path toward becoming the ultimate authoritarian monster himself. They believed that their unparalleled endurance was their greatest, most infallible weapon against the terrors of the chaotic universe. Tragically, it was precisely this unyielding resilience, this stubborn refusal to ever surrender, that would eventually become their most devastating and fatal vulnerability in the end. The great architectural triumphs of their brutal conquests, massive fortresses of dark stone and heavy iron, stood as monuments to their inflexible will. Inside their great warships, the echoing silence was broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of life support systems purging toxins from the air. The deep, rumbling resonance of massive pipe organs would occasionally fill their somber halls, a heavy, oppressive sound that celebrated the inevitability of mortality. They were a legion fundamentally obsessed with the grim finality of death, marching tirelessly to deliver the Emperor's peace to a chaotic galaxy. Their tactical doctrines relied heavily on the deployment of widespread alchemical weapons, transforming vibrant ecosystems into dead, gray wastelands. They found a dark, utilitarian beauty in the absolute ruination of a hostile environment, reshaping conquered planets to resemble the toxic desolation of their lost homeworld. But as the shadows of heresy began to slowly creep across the galaxy, unseen forces were watching the Pale King and his bitter sons. Ancient, malevolent entities dwelling within the chaotic dimensions recognized the deep-seated flaws hidden beneath the Death Guard's seemingly impenetrable ceramite armor. A dark, insidious presence, a god of stagnation and decay, turned its innumerable rotting eyes toward the mighty 14th Legion. This foul intelligence understood that true corruption does not always strike with sudden violence, but often creeps in slowly through the agonizing grind of endless attrition. The stage was being carefully set for a tragedy of truly galactic proportions, a betrayal that would echo through the eternity of the cosmos. The Death Guard, the absolute masters of survival, were about to be thrust into an environment where endurance itself would become an eternal curse. We look upon ancient records, reading faded ink on crumbling scrolls, trembling at the sheer horror of their ultimate fate. The warnings were present, written in the absolute ruin of 1,000 purged worlds, yet none possessed the divine vision to see the approaching dark storm. The galaxy was blissfully unaware of the immense biological nightmare that was slowly gestating within the shifting, unholy tides of the Imperium. Soon, the mighty Death Guard fleet would be commanded to transition into the warp, completely ignorant of the terrible, inescapable snare waiting for them. The fabric of reality would soon tear open, releasing a suffocating tide of unstoppable, rotting sickness upon the noble warriors. A doom approached that could not be fought with bolter or blade, a subtle enemy that would strike directly from within their own genetically enhanced biology. The mighty engines of the 14th Legion's warships roared with defiant power, preparing to carry them into the treacherous madness of the warp. They marched toward their destiny, with unbroken ranks, utterly blind to the horrifying truth that their legendary endurance was about to become their eternal prison. The transition into the Imperium was abrupt, tearing a jagged wound through the very fabric of reality to swallow the Death Guard fleet. Almost immediately, the sacred Geller fields, the invisible energy barriers protecting the mighty warships from the chaotic dimension, began to violently fluctuate and hum. Deep within the mechanical bowels of the flagship Terminus Est, warning klaxons erupted into life, bathing the cold iron corridors in a strobe, red, panicked light. Tech priests scrambled frantically across the vibrating grated floors, desperately chanting binary prayers to soothe the agitated, failing machine spirits of the reactors. The immense, cathedral-like spaces of the strike cruisers shuddered uncontrollably as invisible, malevolent forces battered against the weakening energy shields from the outside. A thick, unnatural condensation began to form upon the blessed heavy bulkheads, dripping a foul, oily residue that smelled of ancient, undisturbed graves and absolute stagnation. Captains, clad in heavy ceramite, stood rigidly upon command bridges, expressions hidden beneath grim helms as they analyzed spiraling tactical data. The Auspex scanners screamed in absolute mechanical agony, unable to process the shifting, impossible geometry of the warp storms that had completely encircled their immobilized fleet. This was no ordinary navigational hazard. It was a deliberate, inescapable trap, carefully orchestrated by a god of stagnation and boundless decay. The benevolent entity known as Nurgle had extended his rotting, metaphysical grasp, dragging the entire 14th Legion into a suffocating, inescapable pocket of the chaotic void. Systemic realism dictates that every vessel must maintain strict internal quarantine, yet the heavy blast doors automatically sealed themselves without any human command. The holy machine oil lubricating the massive grinding gears of the ship's internal defense turrets rapidly thickened into a black, sluggish tar, jamming the complex mechanisms. Before the very eyes of the disciplined infantry units, the flawless metal of their bolters began to rapidly oxidize and flake away into useless ash. The specialized ammunition, designed to eradicate the foulest of alien horrors, mysteriously expanded and jammed within the rusted feeding mechanisms of their heavy firearms. A terrifying sickness, a plague of unfathomable supernatural origin, manifested simultaneously across every single warship, trapped within the suffocating darkness of the warp storm. It bypassed the most advanced filtration systems of their Mark III iron armor, directly infiltrating the genetically enhanced biology of the mighty Adeptus Astartes themselves. The legendary physical resilience of the Death Guard was forcefully turned against them, transforming their bodies into battlegrounds for a microscopic, unyielding enemy. Instead of delivering a swift, merciful end, the supernatural contagion caused their organs to bloat and rupture, only to be unnaturally sustained by dark, metaphysical energy. Down in the cavernous armories, heavily armored warriors methodically attempted to perform the sacred rites of maintenance on their rapidly decaying war gear. They utilized heavy, ratcheting tools and sacred solvents, yet the rot spread faster than their frantic mechanical efforts, consuming both ceramite plating and blessed plasteel alike. A foul, buzzing noise, the collective droning of billions of unseen massive plague flies, echoed through the vast, echoing ventilation shafts of the crippled warships. It was an auditory hallucination that slowly became physically real, a maddening resonance that ground against the disciplined minds of the stoic Space Marines. Strange, grotesque manifestations of the plague. God began to physically materialize within the lower decks, ripping themselves free from the heavily rusted bulkheads. They were formless masses of festering matter, dripping a corrosive, dark fluid that instantly dissolved the holy adamantium decking upon contact, defiling the sacred ground. Micro-engagements erupted in the claustrophobic corridors as disciplined firing lines attempted to cleanse the sudden demonic incursions from their sanctified ships. Rusted combat knives and heavy trench spades were drawn in utter silence, striking against shifting, gelatinous horrors threatening to engulf the critical engineering bays. Volleys of specialized mass-reactive rounds were fired from the few functioning bolters, illuminating the dark, foggy corridors with blinding, flashing muzzles. Yet, the horrific entity simply absorbed the explosive impacts, reforming their decaying mass instantly, rendering the standard tactical doctrines of the Adeptus Astartes completely useless. The air filtration processors ground to a violent halt, choking on thick fungal spores that aggressively bloomed across the complex sensory arrays. The stoic warriors waded through knee-deep, viscous sludge, their heavy boots struggling for traction against the rapidly dissolving metallic flooring of their own domain. In the central command sanctum of the flagship, Primarch Mortarion stood completely motionless, his pale eyes glaring at the failing tactical hololithic displays. His massive scythe, Silence, rested heavily against the command throne, its usually humming power field flickering erratically as the ambient supernatural rot gnawed at its ancient circuitry. The pale king watched in silent fury as the biometric runes of his beloved sons turned from a healthy green to a decaying amber. His legion, the absolute pinnacle of human endurance, was being systematically dismantled by an enemy they could not simply crush beneath their heavy, relentless boots. A vile, whispering voice, a sound like crumbling parchment and wet earth, echoed directly within the minds of every living soul trapped inside the fleet. It spoke of a benevolent, loving grandfather who only wished to bestow his glorious gifts of eternal stagnation upon the mighty warriors of Barbarus. The micro-engagements intensified across the Grand Fleet, an agonizing struggle between the unyielding mechanical discipline of the Adeptus Astartes and the chaotic, boundless rot. Servitors, their cybernetic lobotomized brains corrupted by the scrap code of the plague, turned their heavy industrial welding lasers against their former Space Marine masters. Heavy, grinding chainswords roared into life, their adamantium teeth chewing through the mutated, swollen flesh of the corrupted cybernetic drones in desperate, localized cleansings. Sparks of blue electricity showered the rusted corridors as the Death Guard fiercely attempted to silence the horrific manifestations of the dark, laughing god. Yet, the physical combat was secondary to the horrific biological war waging within the very veins of the trapped Space Marine infantry. Their immense, heavily reinforced rib cages cracked under the unnatural pressure of expanding, corrupted organs, forcing them to endure a level of agony that defied all logic. In the medici bays, automated servo skulls hovered helplessly, optical sensors flashing desperate red warnings as they scanned mutating genetics of the fallen. Apothecaries found their whirring narthekium gauntlets completely ineffective against a supernatural pathogen that actively rewrote the divine code of the Emperor's brilliant creation. The plague did not grant them the dignified release of a swift end. It commanded them to endure the absolute maximum threshold of suffering. Heavy ceramite armor plates fused permanently with swelling, diseased flesh, turning their protective war gear into an inescapable, suffocating Iron Maiden of torment. Mortarion, witnessing the absolute ruination of his sons, felt a despair so profound it threatened to shatter his stoic, unyielding iron resolve. He possessed the power to cleave a mountain in twain, yet he could not sever the metaphysical chains of the disease that bound his entire legion. The air within the command deck grew incredibly dense, heavy, with the stench of ancient rot and failing ozone scrubbers. The massive armored viewports, usually offering a clear view of the stars, were completely obscured by a swirling, sickly green tempest of pure, unadulterated chaotic warp energy. Desperation, a completely alien concept to the hardened veterans of the 14th Legion, began to finally seep into the collective consciousness of the trapped warriors. They continued to fire weapons, performing tactical routines, but mechanical precision was slowly replaced by a sluggish, agonizing, and terrifying delirium. The great, rhythmic heartbeat of the Death Guard, once a unified, thundering march of absolute conquest, dissolved into a chaotic, arrhythmic spasm of endless suffering. The mighty war machines, the dreadnoughts, and the heavy siege tanks fell completely silent as their internal mechanisms were devoured by supernatural aggressive rust. Finally, from the swirling, diseased fog outside the failing Geller fields, true, massive silhouettes of Nurgle's demonic vanguard began to physically approach the crippled fleet. The battle for the soul of the 14th Legion officially commenced as the first deafening roar of absolute despair echoed through dying warships. The catastrophic breaching of the heavy hulls commenced with a sickening crunch of warping adamantium, as the massive, decaying boarding torpedoes of the Plague Vanguard violently penetrated the crippled warships. An overwhelming wave of pure, supernatural pestilence flooded the darkened, pressurized corridors immediately. Disciplined ranks of heavily armored Death Guard warriors, their ceramite plating already weeping dark, oily fluids from the supernatural contagion, locked their magnetic boots to the vibrating deck. They raised their rusted bolters in perfect, unbroken synchronization, preparing to deliver furious, unyielding retribution. A silent command cascaded through the failing tactical network, and the darkness was instantly shattered by the blinding, strobing flashes of mass-reactive munitions. A storm of explosive ordnance roared down the narrow confines, seeking to completely obliterate the grotesque, shambling horrors that poured inward. The demonic entities absorbed the punishing volley with horrifying indifference, their swollen, gelatinous forms rippling as they consumed the explosive impacts without falling. They advanced relentlessly through the blinding flashes, leaving a foul, corrosive trail of thick sludge upon the holy metallic flooring. Heavy flamer units stepped forward from the defensive lines, their promethium tanks groaning under the immense pressure of their corrupted, oxidizing valves. They unleashed torrents of blinding, alchemical fire into the encroaching tide, desperately seeking to forcefully cleanse the defiled corridors of absolute corruption. The roaring flames illuminated the chaotic nightmare, casting long, erratic shadows across the rusted bulkheads as the cleansing fire washed over the demonic vanguard. Yet, the unnatural entities simply waded through the blazing inferno, their decaying forms regenerating faster than the holy fire could consume them. Seeing their ranged superiority rendered completely ineffective against the supernatural resilience of the warp spawn, the stoic warriors of the 14th Legion seamlessly transitioned to brutal melee combat. Heavy trench spades and humming power scythes were drawn, sparking violently against the encroaching darkness. They charged directly into the suffocating, toxic miasma, their corrupted power armor grinding and shrieking as they violently collided with the bloated horrors. Sparks of blue energy showered the chaotic scene as power weapons cleaved through supernatural matter, releasing bursts of foul, stagnant vapor. It was a collision of immovable objects against an unstoppable, rotting tide, a brutal test of absolute endurance that defied all mortal comprehension. The Space Marines struck with perfect, mechanized precision, desperately trying to silence the laughing abominations that mocked their grim, unyielding discipline. A towering champion of the Death Guard, his helmet cracked and leaking a dark, viscous substance, swung his massive, heavy cleaver with devastating kinetic force. He struck a grotesque plague-bearer directly in the center of its mass, seeking to forcefully banish the foul entity. The immense blade passed through the demonic flesh, yet the creature merely laughed, wrapping its decaying limbs around the armored champion in a terrifying, suffocating embrace. The Space Marine was overwhelmed, dragged down into the bubbling, acidic sludge that rapidly pooled across the ruined decking. Across the entire trapped fleet, similar tragedies unfolded in brutal synchronization, as the legendary resilience of the Adeptus Astartes was methodically broken down. They fought with a grim, magnificent defiance, refusing to take a single step backward even as their corrupted bodies ultimately failed them. Their unyielding faith in the Master of Mankind was tested against a reality where prayer offered no divine shield against the supernatural plague. They chanted litanies of absolute hatred against the chaotic horrors, their voices crackling through rusted vox casters as they delivered the Emperor's peace. Massive dreadnoughts, ancient heroes entombed within heavy cybernetic sarcophagi, awoke from their slumber only to find their complex mechanical systems aggressively paralyzed by the warp-spawned rust. They fired their heavy assault cannons indiscriminately, filling the expansive hangar bays with deafening metallic thunder until their barrels melted. Even as these mighty, mechanical behemoths were swarmed and systematically dismantled by the relentless, rust-inducing tide, they continued to crush the chaotic entities beneath their heavy, hydraulic treads. They embraced their final ruin with absolute dignity, refusing to grant the dark gods the satisfaction of surrender. Primarch Mortarion waded into the absolute center of the apocalyptic conflict, his massive scythe, Silence, reaping a terrible harvest among the encroaching demonic hordes. He was a terrifying vision of majestic ruination, a demigod of death surrounded by the relentless, suffocating decay of his own realm. Every sweeping arc of his enormous blade forcefully dissolved dozens of plague entities, completely expunging them from the material realm with overwhelming, terrifying power. Yet, for every abomination he destroyed, 2 more manifested from the dark, swirling vapors that continually poured through the breached holes. The Pale King fought with an exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue, his incredible genetically engineered muscles burning with the unnatural, agonizing strain of the warp disease. He witnessed his beloved sons falling to ruin all around him, their incredible fortitude twisted into an agonizing curse. They did not fall swiftly to a glorious, honorable end. Instead, they were forced to endure a horrifying, agonizing stagnation as their armor fused with their mutating forms. The dark liquid pooling beneath their heavy boots was a grim testament to the absolute failure of their invincible physiology. A vile, colossal entity, a massive, great unclean one, squeezed its bloated, decaying bulk through the shattered blast doors of the primary command deck. It radiated an aura of supreme, suffocating lethargy, its booming laughter causing the rusted lighting fixtures to violently shatter into 1,000 pieces. Mortarion charged the grotesque monstrosity, his tattered robes flowing behind him like the wings of a fallen angel, descending into the darkest depths of the abyss. The clash between the Lord of Death and the Avatar of Plague sent terrifying shockwaves rippling through the decaying metal structure. Their weapons collided with the force of dying stars, sparks of corrupted energy raining down upon the ruined command consoles and the shattered bodies of the fallen. Mortarion sought to absolutely eradicate the foul creature, channeling all his bitterness and deep fury into every devastating, kinetic strike. But the demon merely absorbed the punishment, its infinite mass of decaying flesh acting as an impenetrable, supernatural shield against the Primarch's immense divine strength. It spoke words of absolute despair, whispering terrible truths about the Emperor's supposed betrayal and the inevitable cosmic victory of eternal rot. The psychic onslaught accompanying the physical battle began to relentlessly erode the strict, unyielding discipline of the remaining Death Guard warriors still fighting. Their bolters clicked empty, their heavy chainsaws ground to a rusted halt, and their magnificent resistance slowly dissolved into a terrifying, inescapable lethargy. A profound darkness, heavier than any mere shadow, began to completely envelop the chaotic skirmishes, extinguishing the flickering fires of absolute defiance one by one. The proud warriors of Barbarus, who had survived the most toxic environments in the galaxy, were finally, tragically brought to their knees. They knelt in the pools of dark sludge, their corrupted heads bowed under the crushing weight of an agony they could no longer bear. The physical combat slowly ceased, replaced by a dreadful silence that was far more terrifying than the previous thunder of relentless war. The demonic entities halted their relentless advance, surrounding the kneeling space marines like a grotesque, mocking audience, observing the final act of a grand, cosmic tragedy. The true battle was no longer fought with weapons of iron, but within the tormented, unbreakable souls of the mighty 14th Legion. The archivist trembles as he recounts these forbidden truths, reading the tragic details from a crumbling scroll bound in heavy, tarnished brass. The epic tragedy of the Death Guard was not their ultimate defeat, but their agonizing realization that their absolute endurance was the instrument of their damnation. The suffocating darkness finally settled over the crippled fleet, a profound and eerie silence, completely replacing the preceding mechanical thunder. Drifting aimlessly within the chaotic currents of the Imperium, the majestic warships of the 14th Legion became colossal, floating tombs of unimaginable, eternal torment. Within the shattered command decks, thick ash began to fall like gray, toxic snow, blanketing the ruined consoles and the kneeling forms of the mighty warriors. The air grew impossibly dense, heavy with the undeniable scent of absolute stagnation and irreversible systemic decay. They remained paralyzed in their pools of dark fluid, their incredibly resilient biology violently fighting a microscopic war they could never possibly win. Their heavy ceramite plates cracked and groaned as their corrupted forms swelled, fusing their sacred armor permanently into inescapable iron cages of suffering. Primarch Mortarion remained standing amidst the absolute ruination of his flagship, leaning heavily upon the rusted haft of his massive scythe. Silence. His pale, gaunt features were completely twisted in an expression of unquantifiable psychological agony and deep, profound self-loathing. He observed the terrifying reality of his beloved sons, the greatest survivors in the galaxy, reduced to gasping, wretched figures of absolute despair. The divine strength granted by the Master of Mankind was entirely useless against a supernatural pathogen designed solely to humiliate and break their indomitable spirit. A horrifying, illogical phenomenon began to manifest across the ruined decks, as the very structure of the ancient warship started to organically mutate. Rusted bulkheads softened into weeping, fleshy membranes, while the heavy metallic support pillars twisted into the terrifying shapes of colossal, petrified bones. The strict, mechanical order of the Adeptus Astartes was violently replaced by the chaotic, asymmetrical beauty of unchecked, boundless disease. Luminous, sickly fungi bloomed rapidly across the shattered viewing ports, casting a terrifying, pale green luminescence over the fallen warriors of the proud Death Guard. From the shadows of the twisted corridors, a singular, massive plague fly buzzed with a deafening rhythmic resonance, echoing through the minds of the paralyzed space marines. It was not a physical creature, but a psychic manifestation of the dark god's absolute, terrifying patience. The vile entity whispered promises of relief directly into their fevered consciousness, offering an immediate end to the unbearable, crushing pain of their endless mutation. All they had to do was surrender their unyielding pride and accept the loving embrace of absolute rot. For days, or perhaps entire centuries within the timeless void of the warp, the mighty 14th Legion endured this psychological siege. Their legendary stubbornness, the very trait that defined their entire existence, became the instrument of their prolonged, excruciating downfall and ultimate, tragic collapse. The psychic toll proved far more devastating than the physical corruption tearing through their genetically enhanced veins. They were forced to witness their brothers losing their minds, their stoic discipline slowly dissolving into maddened wet coughing and terrified, incoherent whispers of complete and utter surrender. Mortarion felt the crushing weight of his monumental failure pressing down upon his broad, armored shoulders. He had sworn to protect his sons from the tyrants of the universe, yet his own arrogance had blindly led them into the most inescapable, tyrannical snare imaginable. The pale king fell to his knees upon the defiled, fleshy decking, his massive scythe slipping from his trembling, corrupted grasp. He gazed into the swirling, toxic mists of the Imperium, recognizing that his unyielding defiance was the very catalyst that had doomed his entire legion to ruin. A terrifying choice presented itself to the Lord of Death, a cruel ultimatum delivered by the laughing architect of their profound suffering. He could watch his sons endure this agonizing, eternal decay, or he could forcefully surrender his own immortal soul to save them from the pain. The grim realization shattered the last remaining fragments of his mighty, iron resolve. To spare his beloved warriors from an eternity of unbearable torment, the proud Primarch made the ultimate, tragic sacrifice, bowing his head to the dark entity that ruled the realms of absolute pestilence. In that defining moment of complete capitulation, a terrifying, supernatural wave of dark energy washed over the entire stranded fleet. The unbearable agony of the plague abruptly ceased, replaced by a horrifying, numbing euphoria that completely rewrote their psychological understanding of suffering and divine purpose. The Death Guard no longer felt the agonizing sting of their corrupted organs or the crushing weight of their fused, rusted armor. Their minds were irrevocably twisted, completely convinced that this monstrous, horrifying mutation was actually a magnificent, loving gift bestowed upon them by a benevolent grandfather. They rose slowly from the dark puddles, their massive, bloated forms radiating a terrifying aura of supernatural resilience. They had completely transcended the fragile limitations of mortal flesh, becoming eternal, lumbering vectors of disease, fully dedicated to spreading this newfound toxic enlightenment across the unsuspecting galaxy. The air filtration systems, once struggling to purge the toxins, now intentionally pumped thick, noxious yellow fog throughout the cavernous decks. The warriors of Barbarus breathed in the foul miasma with deep, rattling satisfaction, their corrupted lungs perfectly adapted to the absolute, suffocating ruination. The holy, unpainted ceramite of their armor became entirely saturated with aggressive rust and dark, oozing grime, taking on a sickly, pale green hue. The proud, pristine symbols of the Adeptus Astartes were completely obscured, heavily overwritten by the terrifying, geometric runes of the plague god. They no longer marched with the sharp, crisp, mechanical precision of disciplined soldiers, but rather shambled forward with the terrifying, inevitable momentum of a cosmic glacier. They became an unstoppable force of nature, an absolute manifestation of decay that could never be reasoned with or bargained. This profound state transition fundamentally altered the very soul of the 14th Legion, forever severing their holy connection to the distant master of mankind. They completely embraced their new, terrifying identity, transforming from the Emperor's relentless cleansers into the absolute lords of boundless, eternal distribution of pestilence. The colossal warships, now fully corrupted and operating on demonic scrap code, slowly turned their rusted prows toward the material universe once more. The warp storms that had trapped them finally parted, revealing a galaxy completely unaware of the massive, unholy terror about to be unleashed upon it. Mortarion stood tall upon the ruined command deck, his massive wings unfurling behind him like a tattered, diseased shroud. He was no longer just the pale king of Barbarus. He had completely ascended into a terrifying demonic entity, bound forever to the tragic irony of his surrender. He raised the rusted blade of silence, its power field now crackling with a sickly, dark green supernatural energy. A deep, resonant tolling echoed through the fleet, the terrifying sound of a colossal, unseen bell signaling the beginning of their eternal, apocalyptic crusade against the Imperium. We look upon the aftermath of this grim transformation with absolute, unyielding horror, attempting to desperately comprehend the sheer magnitude of their terrible fall. It serves as a profound, terrifying warning that even the mightiest bastions of human endurance can be completely eroded by insidious, unseen forces. The dark shadows of their absolute despair continue to stretch across the stars, leaving a permanent, festering scar upon the collective soul of humanity. They are a constant, terrifying reminder of the unfathomable dangers that constantly lurk within the deepest, most uncharted depths of the chaotic void. The tragic tale of the 14th Legion demonstrates the terrifying power of supernatural stagnation, completely subverting the noble ideals of survival and resilience. It is a grim-dark reality where absolute victory is impossible, and the only remaining certainty is the slow, agonizing, and inevitable descent into absolute ruin. The corrupted armada, now a grotesquely swollen reflection of its former imperial glory, forcefully tore its way back into the fragile material universe. They carried with them the ultimate, suffocating truth of the warp, a horrific testament to the absolute inevitability of boundless, eternal decay. Where once they descended upon rebellious worlds as the Emperor's unyielding instrument of swift compliance, they now arrived as the terrifying heralds of supreme, cosmic stagnation. The mighty 14th Legion had become the very absolute nightmare they had originally sworn to relentlessly eradicate. Their majestic, rusted warships entered the orbit of pristine, unsuspecting planetary systems, casting long, sickeningly green shadows across the frightened continents below. The heavy bombardment that followed did not deliver explosive ruination, but rather unleashed localized atmospheric tempests of highly concentrated, supernatural pestilence. The once vibrant hive cities, towering monuments of human architectural triumph, rapidly choked under the oppressive weight of the descending, toxic yellow fog. The intricate, massive atmospheric processing plants were violently overloaded, their complex metallic vents forcefully regurgitating the vile, corrosive sludge of the plague god. Driven by a completely twisted, horrifying sense of boundless paternal affection, the corrupted space marines lumbered slowly across the agonizing, dying landscapes. They truly believed they were granting a magnificent, eternal salvation, forcefully liberating the fragile mortal populations from the terrifying burden of inevitable mortality. They absorbed the desperate, highly concentrated laser fire of the planetary defense forces with absolute, terrifying indifference, their bloated forms refusing to stagger. The specialized defensive barricades rapidly rusted and collapsed into useless, oxidized dust long before the lumbering giants even physically reached the trembling lines. Primarch Mortarion, the terrifying Lord of Death, surveyed these newly cultivated gardens of rot from the ruined command deck of his flagship. His massive, tattered wings cast an immense, suffocating darkness over the shattered hive spires, symbolizing the permanent eclipse of all human hope and ambition. He bore the immense, crushing weight of a tragic, eternal paradox, fully possessing the power of a dark god, yet permanently bound in unyielding servitude. The profound bitterness that had initially fueled his legendary rebellion on Barbarus was now entirely consumed by a terrifying, hollow cosmic resignation. The mighty Death Guard eventually retreated into the absolute depths of the Eye of Terror, seeking to establish a permanent, horrifying dominion. There, they forcefully reshaped a lifeless, floating celestial body into a terrifying dark reflection of their lost, toxic homeworld, naming it simply the Plague Planet. This demonic world became the absolute epicenter of their terrifying eternal crusade, an endless, industrial nightmare of rust, smog, and boundless suffering. Colossal, rusted factories tirelessly belched thick, noxious clouds into the sickly atmosphere. manufacturing corrupted munitions designed to spread maximum terrifying biological ruination. Endless, treacherous swamps of boiling, acidic chemicals dominated the tortured landscape, harboring monstrous, unimaginable entities that defied all known laws of universal logic. The stoic warriors of the 14th Legion continually marched through these vile, corrosive bogs, conducting their terrifying, unending military drills in absolute, eerie silence. Their majestic, disciplined formations remained completely intact, a grotesque, horrifying mockery of their glorious imperial past during the era of the Great Crusade. They were eternally trapped within a horrifying cycle of continuous, agonizing mutation, entirely incapable of experiencing the merciful release of a true end. This is the terrifying, absolute reality of the dark universe we inhabit, a realm where unparalleled endurance merely prolongs the inevitable, horrific suffering. The magnificent strength of the Adeptus Astartes, originally forged to fiercely protect humanity, can be masterfully weaponized to orchestrate our absolute, utter ruination. The grand cosmic joke, orchestrated by the laughing god of decay, was fundamentally rooted in the profound tragedy of the Pale King's pride. Mortarion had foolishly believed he could fiercely resist the tyrannical forces of the warp, only to become their most terrifying, effective, and enduring instrument. The terrifying resilience they proudly offered as a divine shield for the fragile Imperium now serves as the unbreakable foundation of their eternal damnation. They are a permanent wound across the tapestry of the cosmos, spreading their dark, toxic gospel to the uncharted stars. We must carefully study the terrifying nature of their ultimate fall, meticulously analyzing the subtle, insidious pathways through which absolute corruption takes root. The most profound vulnerabilities are rarely found in physical armor, but rather hidden deep within the complex, unyielding arrogance of the noble human spirit. For every magnificent victory claimed by the holy forces of the Emperor, the terrifying shadows of the warp continually lengthen and aggressively deepen. The relentless, grinding attrition of the long war constantly tests the psychological boundaries of our absolute faith, threatening to violently shatter our fragile collective resolve. The terrifying legions of the Plague God do not require overwhelming strategic brilliance to achieve their dark, apocalyptic objectives across the burning galaxy. They simply rely upon the absolute, terrifying inevitability of exhaustion, patiently waiting for the magnificent defenses of the Imperium to slowly, agonizingly rust away. Even the most majestic, heavily fortified bastion of human defiance will eventually crumble under the continuous, suffocating weight of infinite, unrelenting temporal decay. This is the profound, terrifying lesson completely embedded within the tragic, eternal saga of the mighty 14th Legion and their ruined Pale Master. The air within the Sanctum of Oaths grows incredibly heavy and cold, thick with the suffocating dust of forgotten centuries and absolute despair. My trembling, ink-stained fingers slowly trace the final rusted metallic runes deeply etched into the surface of this cursed, heavily corrupted vellum scroll. The immense, towering bookcases surrounding me seem to physically lean inward, casting terrifying, oppressive shadows that actively dance upon the ancient metallic decking. I feel the terrifying, unseen presence of the dark universe pressing violently against the heavily shielded holy bulkheads of this deep subterranean archive. The single, massive wax candle illuminating my humble workspace begins to violently sputter, its warm, golden light rapidly failing against the encroaching, terrifying gloom. A profound, chilling silence violently reclaims the cavernous library, forcefully replacing the echoing, terrifying thunder of the distant apocalyptic historical narratives. I carefully roll the crumbling, brittle edges of the ancient parchment, sealing away the terrifying secrets of the Death Guard for another generation. The heavy, rusted iron clasp clicks shut with a deafening, final resonance, signifying the absolute conclusion of this grim, sorrowful documentation of ruination. We are all merely fragile, fleeting sparks, bravely defying the terrifying, boundless darkness of a chaotic, utterly unforgiving, and aggressively hostile cosmos. The tragic fall of Primarch Mortarion is a stern, absolute warning that our holy devotion must remain entirely pure, completely unclouded by foolish pride. Maintain your absolute vigilance, my faithful acolytes, for the terrifying agents of supernatural stagnation continuously whisper their dark, comforting lies from the deepest shadows. Never willingly embrace the false, horrifying mercy of the plague god, for true salvation is forged exclusively through the purifying fires of absolute sacrifice. The flame finally dies, plunging the Grand Archive into complete, terrifying blackness, leaving only the lingering, bitter scent of burnt incense and exhausted promethium. In this suffocating, absolute dark, our unyielding faith must serve as the singular, magnificent beacon guiding humanity through the eternal, terrifying storm. We must fiercely reject the terrifying despair heavily radiating from the plague planet, standing completely resolute against the unstoppable, horrific tide of cosmic rot. The survival of our noble species demands an absolute, uncompromising rejection of the dark, terrifying comfort found within the agonizing embrace of endless stagnation. The colossal forces of decay actively seek to penetrate the sacred armor of our minds, probing for any lingering trace of hesitation or doubt. You must fortify your thoughts with the unyielding iron of holy devotion, ensuring that no insidious whisper can ever breach your heavily reinforced spiritual defenses. Look upon the vast, star-strewn canvas of our galaxy and understand that every flickering light represents a desperate, agonizing struggle against the creeping darkness. We are surrounded by nightmares that defy all logic, ancient horrors patiently waiting for the magnificent bastion of humanity to finally show its fatal weakness. The tragic fate of the Death Guard teaches us that unparalleled physical endurance is entirely meaningless without the purifying fire of an absolute, unwavering faith. When the body fails and the iron rusts, it is the immortal soul alone that must fiercely resist the corrupting temptations of the chaotic void. Even as we hide within these deep, subterranean archives, desperately clutching at the fading memories of our glorious past, the eternal war rages onward. The thunderous echoes of distant apocalyptic conflicts continuously reverberate through the cold, metallic decking beneath our boots, a constant reminder of our grim, unrelenting duty. Do not let the absolute terror of the plague planet paralyze your righteous fury or extinguish the blazing inferno of your holy imperial zeal. Acknowledge the horrifying reality of their eternal rot, but use that terrifying knowledge to sharpen the blessed, kinetic weapons of your own unyielding, spiritual resistance. We march forward into an uncertain, terrifying future, carrying the heavy, sorrowful burdens of 10,000 years of relentless, agonizing attrition and endless sacrifice. Yet we do not surrender to the suffocating darkness, for we are the Emperor's chosen children, forged in the glorious crucible of absolute, uncompromising war. May the brilliant, divine light of the Golden Throne forever shield your fragile mortal souls from the terrifying, corrupting grasp of the ultimate ruin. I humbly deliver this final, solemn prayer into the terrifying vast silence of the void, endlessly hoping it reaches the distant, shattered heavens. The eternal, crushing weight of our grim reality remains completely unchanged, an absolute testament to the unending, terrifying sacrifices demanded by the unforgiving cosmos. We endure the profound, agonizing darkness so that the distant, magnificent dream of a unified, holy galaxy might somehow survive. Let the tragic history of the fallen 14th Legion forever fortify your unbreakable holy resolve against the terrifying, chaotic unknown that constantly surrounds us. Embrace your duty with an unyielding heart, standing resolute until the very end of time. Imperator Gloria in excelsis terra. If you wish to uncover more forbidden truths and heavily classified lore from the darkest depths of the Imperial archives, please remember to like this transmission, share it with your fellow loyalists, and subscribe to our channel for future datalogs.